I didn't realize something was seriously wrong until the night I bumped into a dresser while sleepwalking and woke up to see a barrage of floating comments in midair like I was inside some kind of live-streamed fever dream, and the worst part? Every single one of those comments was watching me, narrating my every move like I was the clueless lead in a chaotic romance novel, and they were the peanut gallery rooting for chaos, the heroine's awake. Will she go to Liam Carter's room again tonight? Bro's stamina can't handle this every day. Let him rest, girl. And just like that, I was thrown into an alternate reality I never signed up for. One where the audience had front row seats to my midnight escapades, which, to my horror, involved sleepwalking straight into my stepbrother's arms every night like it was the most natural thing in the world. And yeah, before you ask, Liam is hot annoyingly, inhumanly hot, like the kind of guy who looks like a Calvin Klein model, but acts like a villain. In a K-drama, cold, possessive, calculating, and somehow, under all that, unbearably gentle in the most messed up ways. So when I peeked into his room that night, totally confused and mildly terrified, and saw him lounging shirtless with his toned abs on full display, casually lifting the quilt and saying, "Took you long enough," like this was some kind of regular sleepover arrangement, I froze not just because of the view, which deserved a content warning, by the way, but because of the wild realization that this had been happening over and over without me ever remembering a damn thing, and the barrage was no help at all, egging me on with lines like, "He's shirtless tonight. Let's go," or "Girl, don't hesitate, ride that man like you mean it," and I couldn't even pretend I wasn't flustered because when Liam looked at me and said, "Come here," patting the bed like he was inviting me to die with dignity, my body moved on its own. And before I could process anything, he grabbed my chin, turned my face, and kissed me like he owned me, and I panic had me hands pushing, my mind screaming, but he just smirked, eyes dark and voice teasing, "Sister," playing hard to get again. And I wanted to scream that this was wrong, so wrong, except my heart was racing, and the comments were going nuts. He called her sister. Say it again, Liam. This forbidden love hits different. OMG, I can't watch, but I can't look away, and yeah, okay, it was insane, but somewhere deep in the confusion, I started remembering bruises I couldn't explain, kisses I hadn't recalled. And that night when his lips found mine again and the kiss deepened, I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just about sleepwalking, because if it was, then why did my chest ache when I wasn't near him? Why did my body react to his touch even before my mind caught up? The next morning, I counted the hickeys in the mirror with a scarf wrapped tight around my neck like it was January in Seattle. It wasn't. And my mom gave me the side-eye at lunch because I was literally sweating under layers at the dining table while trying to smile through the awkwardness. "Are you sick?" she asked, reaching for my forehead, and I practically jumped out of my chair to stop her, rambling about youth fashion and layering aesthetics, all while Liam sat across from me, pretending to be the innocent little stepbrother, sipping his tea like he hadn't made out with me in the dark 6 hours ago, giving me that stupid smile like, "I know something you don't, and I swear." The whiplash from daytime Liam to nighttime Liam was enough to give me emotional vertigo, especially when I had to deal with the fact that technically, we weren't related by blood, but socially, everyone still saw us as siblings, which made the whole thing feel 10 times more twisted, and to make matters worse, my sleepwalking wasn't even something I'd had before high school. It started after my mom married his dad and we moved in together, and then I suddenly began wandering at night, often found standing at Liam's door like some sad ghost. And my mom took me to a traditional Chinese medicine clinic once, thinking it was stress-related, and for a while it stopped, but now it was back with a vengeance and dragging me straight into forbidden territory, and the worst part? Liam wasn't stopping. Mei welcomed it, wanted it, leaned into it like he knew this was his one chance to get close without breaking the taboo in daylight, and the comments confirmed it. He's into it. Girl, protect this Yandra king. He's crazy in love, and I'm here for it, which didn't help at all. So when I tried to confront him, tried to get answers, tried to ask what he really wanted, kissed me again, harder, deeper, more desperate, like he was afraid I'd disappear, and whispered against my lips, "You can pretend all you want, but your body remembers me." And yeah, that line would have been cringe coming from anyone else, but from him? It made my knees buckle, and I hated it, hated how much I wanted it, hated that I couldn't just be normal, that I was falling for the one guy I should never want, hated that every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face and felt his hands and heard that voice saying my name like it was the only word that mattered, and now I couldn't even tell what was real and what was sleepwalking anymore because the feelings were bleeding into each other like watercolor on wet paper. And it didn't help that the barrages were getting bolder, reading my mind like they were in on some twisted joke. She's falling for him. She'll never recover. Just wait till she finds out the truth, and wait. What truth? What truth? I blinked at the floating words, but they vanished before I could grab hold, leaving me alone in the room, heart pounding, lips still tingling from a kiss I couldn't explain and a fear I couldn't name. Because I was starting to realize that maybe this wasn't just about sleepwalking at all, maybe this was about wanting something I wasn't allowed to have, craving someone I wasn't supposed to touch, and maybe, just maybe, the only way out of this mess was to finally stop lying to myself about what I really felt every time Liam looked at me like I was the only girl in the world who mattered. The moment we stepped into that hospital room and I saw Robert Carter lying on the bed, thin, sallow, a shell of the man who once ran the Carter Empire, I felt like I'd walked into a memory that didn't belong to me, except it was Liam's. And it was bleeding into the room like a silent scream, because despite the wires and monitors, despite the saline drip keeping him technically alive, Robert looked more like a corpse than a father. And Liam? Liam stood at the edge of the bed with his hands in his pockets, dressed in all black like he'd already buried him in his mind, and I didn't say a word because I knew this wasn't a moment that needed noisy, it needed space and grief, and maybe a little fury too. Because when Liam finally spoke, his voice was low and sharp, like a blade unsheathed just for this occasion. "You started cheating when I was 10, remember?" he said to the man who couldn't even blink in reply, and I flinched because the air in the room grew cold instantly after Mom found out. She spiraled, she stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped smiling, and then one day, she just stopped living, and I stared at him, stunned, because I had never heard him talk about his mother before. Not even once, and now the words were falling out like broken glass. "You killed her with your betrayal, and then you replaced her like she was a broken toy," and Robert didn't move, couldn't move, but the heart monitor started beeping. Faster, like it could still feel the weight of guilt, even if he couldn't say it, and Liam leaned in closer, his tone mocking, bitter. "What's the point of staying alive this long if you've already lost everything that made you human?" And I stood in the corner, arms crossed tight over my chest, watching this man I loved tear open a wound he'd kept hidden for years, realizing for the first time how deep it really ran, and suddenly all those cold stares, those sharp words, the way he shut people out and only let me in at night, it all made sense, because Liam had been grieving for a mother I never knew, fighting a war I'd never seen, and yet somehow he'd still found room for me in his world of thorns. And when he finally turned away from the bed and walked toward me, I didn't move, not even when he reached out and took my hand like he was afraid of falling apart if I let go, and I whispered, "I'm here." Because what else could I say when someone had just confessed their childhood trauma in front of a dying father? And that night, after the doctors rushed in due to Robert's heart rate spiking and Mom stayed back to help manage things, Liam and I drove home in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but necessary, and when we walked in, he dropped onto the sofa and patted the seat beside him like always, but this time I didn't move. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my overnight bag like it was a shield, and when he finally asked, "What's wrong?" I bit my lip and said, "I think I should stay at Kayla's tonight," and he didn't protest, didn't fight it, just stared down at the floor and nodded once, quietly, and as I turned to go upstairs and grab a few things, I found him standing at my bedroom door. His hair messy, his eyes hidden beneath the fringe, voice almost broken. "Do you hate me now?" And I spun around, shaken by the vulnerability. "No," I said instantly, "of course not," and before I could add anything else, he asked, "Then why are you leaving?" And I froze, trying to craft a lie on the spot that wouldn't hurt him. "It's just something I promised a friend earlier," I mumbled, eyes darting everywhere except at him, and he stood there for a moment, silent, unreadable, until I added softly, We're still family, Liam, and if you're ever hurting again, I want you to tell me, okay? And that's when he said it full name, low tone, deadly serious, Natalie Summers, and my heart dropped because no one uses your full name unless they're mad, or broken, or about to say something that'll change everything, and sure enough, the next words knocked the air out of me. I'm not your brother, and I never was, and my mouth went dry. But you're still my stepbrother, I said, trying to tether us back to some kind of boundary, some line in the sand we weren't supposed to cross, and he laughed cold, sarcastic, like the word stepbrother was the cruelest joke in the world. Is that what you call what we've been doing? Step-sibling bonding time? And I wanted to scream. I didn't know what I was doing, I wasn't even awake, but he kept going. You think this is about sleepwalking? Not, you may not remember, but your body does, and his hands were already on my waist, pulling me in, and my chest was pressed against his, heartbeat pounding like it was trying to escape, and he whispered, "You're not gonna erase this like it never happened." Not anymore, and I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this wasn't fair, that I didn't even choose this, except my lips betrayed me, parting just enough for his kiss to land soft and slow, and I melted like always, like a fool, because, damn it, I wanted to believe him, and I hated myself for it, and when I tried to push him away, he carried me into the room anyway, dropped me on the bed like I weighed nothing, and hovered over me, whispering against my cheek, "You can keep lying to yourself, but you can't lie to me," and I didn't move, didn't speak, because he was right every time he touched me, I responded, even if my mind screamed otherwise, and as he finally let me go and left the room, I stared at the ceiling, eyes wide. Heart burning, trying to breathe around the truth I could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about desire, it was about him, the way he looked at me, the way he needed me, the way I had always, quietly, tragically, needed him too. And the next few days I stayed away, crashing at Kayla's again, pretending to be fine, except I wasn't sleeping, and every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the way he said my name, the way he kissed me, the way his voice cracked when he asked if I hated him. And just when I thought I'd go insane replaying every second in my mind, my phone buzzed with a message that sent a chill down my spine. Dinner tomorrow night. My birthday. Be there. And I knew exactly what I was walking back into. Liam's birthday dinner felt like walking into a trap I couldn't escape and didn't really want to. Even though my entire body buzzed with warning signs the second I saw him leaning against the sleek black car outside my building like a prince who owned the night and knew it. Didn't say anything when I got in. Just handed me a small velvet box like he was the one giving gifts tonight, and when I opened it, it was a silver bracelet with a tiny engraved charm, N+L, and my fingers trembled. Because damn him, he knew how to hit where it hurt, that part of me that still wanted us to be something, wanted to believe we were more than just a scandal with good lighting, so I whispered a soft, "Thank you." And he just gave me that cocky little nod and drove us to this dimly lit rooftop restaurant where the skyline looked like a painting and the food tasted like it was flown in from Paris, but I couldn't taste any of it. Not when he kept looking at me like he already knew what I was going to do. Like he was just waiting for me to give in and admit I was his, and when the wine came, I drank too much too fast, the way you do when you're trying to drown all the voices in your head screaming run, except I wasn't running. I was staring straight at him and pretending like the pounding in my chest wasn't about to crack me open, until finally he leaned in across the table and said, "Nat, you've been hiding," and I froze because he was right, because I had been avoiding him, avoiding us. Avoiding everything that felt too real to name, so I stared into my glass and tried to laugh it off. "Don't be dramatic, Liam. I've just been busy," and he wasn't smiling anymore, busy being scared, and I blinked because that was exactly it. But I couldn't say it, so I played dumb. "Scared of what?" And he tilted his head, voice low, eyes sharp. "Scared of how much you want this," and before I could deny it, he asked, "Will you come home tonight?" And my mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because the way he said it, soft, honest, almost vulnerable, cut straight through my defenses, so I nodded, not even trusting myself to speak, and the look on his face when I said yes made me want to cry. Like he'd been holding his breath for weeks and finally exhaled, and when we got home, it felt weirdly quiet, like the whole house knew something was going to change, and after we showered and climbed into bed, he pulled me close without a word and kissed Minute hungrily or desperately like the other nights, but slowly, carefully, like he was memorizing me, like he wanted this moment to last. And when I whispered against his mouth, "When did you start liking me?" he paused like the question physically hurt him, then said, "A year ago. When you had that fever and I sat by your bed all night, holding your hand, watching you breathe. I knew I was done for, and I swallowed hard because I remembered that night too, remembered waking up groggy and seeing him passed out beside me, still holding on like he was scared I'd disappear. And now here we were, tangled together in the wreckage of all the things we weren't supposed to feel. And sometime past midnight, I pretended to sleep, eyes closed, breath steady, when I heard him slip into my room and sit on the edge of my bed, his fingers brushing my hair back before he pressed a soft kiss to my forehead and whispered, "You used to be so brave, Nat, braver than this." And then he added, "I don't want to be your brother, I want to be your boyfriend." And my breath hitched so quietly I hoped he didn't notice, but then I felt his lips at my collarbone, teeth grazing skin, leaving behind a small circle of heat, and I clenched my fists beneath the sheets, trying not to move, not to react. Because if I did, I'd have to admit I wasn't asleep at all, that I wanted him there more than I wanted to breathe. And when he finally left, the silence felt louder than ever, and the next morning, I rushed to the bathroom to check the mirror. Hard in my throat, and yeah, there it was, a fresh mark, right above my collarbone, and I stood there like an idiot wondering if maybe, just maybe, he'd known I was awake the whole time. And when I opened the fridge to find breakfast already packed for me with a post-it note saying "Eat before work, I nearly screamed because it was so domestic, so normal, like we were just any couple living in sin, except we weren't. We were something messier and deeper and more dangerous than that. And then Mom caught me off guard in the kitchen, asking why I was up so late, and I panicked and said I was hungry, totally missing the fact that I'd overslept by hours. And when she said, "Your brother left that for you," I nearly dropped the container because I didn't know if she saw the mark on my neck or if she was pretending not to, and I told myself she didn't notice, that I could still pretend nothing was happening, but deep down I knew the truth was leaking out. And I was just waiting for it to explode. And then out of nowhere, I got the call from the hospital. Robert had died, and everything stopped, like the world went silent. And when I arrived, Liam was standing outside the room, not crying, not speaking, just staring. And when I hugged him, he collapsed into me, whispering, "He's gone." And I said, "I'm here," because it was the only thing I could promise. And then he laughed, not a happy laugh, but one of those hollow, bitter ones that make your chest hurt, and said, "I don't have anyone now, just you." And I squeezed his hand tighter and whispered, "You still have me," and I meant it, but I didn't expect what came next. Didn't expect him to look me in the eye and say, "Now we can be together for real." And I blinked, confused, until he explained, "I made a deal with your mom after he was gone. She'd stop opposing us," and my blood turned cold. "You what?" And he said it again, like it was no big deal, like he hadn't just detonated my entire world. "I gave her shares in the Carter Group in exchange for her blessing," and suddenly I couldn't breathe, because I realized my mom had known everything, had seen everything, and instead of stopping it, she turned it into leverage, and I felt like my skin was on fire. Like I was just a pawn on everyone's chessboard, so I backed away from Liam, eyes stinging. "When did you make this deal?" And he didn't even flinch. "The day my dad was diagnosed," and I wanted to scream, to punch something, to cry until I passed out, but all I could do was walk away, whispering, "Give me some time," because the betrayal came from both sides, and it hurt more than I was ready for, and I needed to figure out whether I was still myself, or just some girl everyone thought they could use. But one thing was clear, everything had changed now, and there was no going back. I don't know what hit me harder, that my mother had known everything about me and Liam and still said nothing, or that Liam had turned our feelings, or whatever it was between us, into some kind of strategic move in a business deal. And the more I thought about it, the more I spiraled, because yeah, maybe I loved him, maybe I wanted him more than I'd ever wanted anyone in my life, but did I really mean so little to the people closest to me that I could be treated like a bargaining chip, like some side clause in a merger? I didn't even realize I'd run all the way home until I slammed the front door shut and saw my mom standing in the hallway, already halfway out with her bag on her shoulder, her face freezing when she saw my eyes red, glassy, wrecked. "Natalie," she started. And I couldn't help it. I looked at her like she was a stranger, like I didn't recognize the woman who raised me anymore, and she sighed, set her bag down, and motioned for me to sit, but I didn't move. I just said quietly, "You knew, and her." Lips trembled. "I didn't mean to keep it from you," and I laughed bitterly because that's what everyone always says when they do exactly the mean to keep it from you. "So, what was I to you, Mom?" I asked, voice shaking. "Just part of a trade? Some token in a power grab?" And she looked hurt, genuinely hurt, but I couldn't stop now, not when my heart was already tearing open. "Did you ever think for 1 second what this would feel like for me?" And she sat down then, reached for my hand, and said, "Sweetheart, you're not a token. You're my daughter. My whole world." I was scared, and I wanted to hate her, I really did, but there was something so human, so broken in the way she said it that I caved a little, let her hold my hand as she told me about the debts my dad left us, about how she used to work 3 jobs to keep the lights on, about how marrying into the Carter family wasn't about love but survival, and suddenly I saw her not as the strong, calculated woman I'd always known, but as someone who had been fighting battles long before I could even spell my name. And when she said, "I thought maybe this way, you'd finally be free to love him without anyone saying you couldn't," I broke, really broke, because the truth was, I'd been denying myself for so long, twisting myself into knots trying to pretend what I felt for Liam was wrong, forbidden, impossible, but it wasn't, not anymore, not really. And when I finally stopped crying, she wiped my face and whispered, "You don't have to forgive me right now. But don't ever think I did this to hurt you." And that night I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up reading old messages, scrolling through photos, wondering at what point everything changed, when Liam went from being the boy who annoyed the hell out of me to the man I couldn't breathe without. And then I started noticing how he'd been trying to win me back in the dumbest, most obvious ways, hovering around the kitchen every time I did the dishes, coming in and out with the lamest excuses, like I forgot my phone or I just took the trash out, even though the bin was empty. And when I finally snapped and said, "Since you're so free, how about you wipe the dishes and put them away too?" he blinked at me like I'd asked him to solve world peace, and yeah, I might have left him standing there in shock. But I could see it in his eye. She was trying, in his own stubborn Liam way, and then one day he came home with this bubbly, overly sweet 9th-grade girl trailing behind him, calling him brother like she was auditioning for some fake cousin role in a sitcom, and the second she sat next to him on the couch, I nearly choked on my tea, because I knew exactly what he was doing was trying to make me jealous, and I hated how well it worked. Hated that I caught myself glaring at her tiny little hands brushing against his sleeve. Hated that he looked straight at me when she giggled and leaned into him like she belonged there. So I played nice, sat down on the other side of her, and asked with the sweetest smile, "Hey cutie, wanna play with your sister for a bit?" And I swear Liam stiffened, but I ignored him, spent the evening feeding her broccoli, telling her Liam was already full because he'd eaten too much vinegar, and when she asked, "Why vinegar?" I smiled and said, "Because he was so sour today." And later, when I walked into his room with a bowl of noodles, I didn't even knock, just barged in, put it on the table, and said, "Eat before it gets cold." And when he tried to act all broody, I rolled my eyes and turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his chest like he'd been starving for this, whispered, "Don't go." And I didn't. Not this time. I let myself melt into him, let myself feel how fast his heart was beating against mine, and when I said, "I haven't heard you call me sister in a while," he murmured, "I don't like that word anymore," and I swallowed hard, because neither did I, not really, and when he whispered, "I was wrong, I thought you'd leave me," I cupped his face and whispered back, "I never planned to," and when he asked, "Then why did you push me away?" I said, "Because I needed to see if you'd fight for me," and his eyes softened, like that answer gave him peace, and that night, I kissed him first, slow and full of all the things I'd been holding back, and when he asked, breathless, "Are you still sleepwalking?" I whispered, "No, I'm wide awake," and his smile was so soft it made my heart ache, and for once, the barrage of comments didn't pop up. The world didn't interrupt us. It was just us fully, beautifully together, and it didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt right, like we were exactly where we were always meant to be, and when I woke up the next morning with his arms around me and his breath warm against my shoulder, I knew I wasn't running anymore. I was home. I don't know exactly when it happened, but sometime between waking up in Liam's arms every morning and catching his sleepy grin as he tightened his hold around my waist, I stopped questioning if what we were doing was wrong and started wondering why it had ever felt wrong in the first place, because the way he kissed me in the mornings, all slow and warm and messy, or the way he touched the small of my back when we passed in the hallway, or even the way he'd lean against the kitchen doorframe. While I did dishes like it was his favorite show on TV, it all felt so natural, like we were two halves of a life that had been waiting to sync up, and I knew people on the outside wouldn't get it, would probably clutch their pearls and call it taboo. But to me, it wasn't about labels or bloodlines or technicalities. It was about the fact that Liam saw me, truly saw me, and I'd been aching to be seen like that my whole damn life. And yeah, we'd been through chaos, and yeah, we'd made every mistake possible trying to run from this thing between us. But now that we'd stopped running, now that I was choosing him with open eyes and steady breath, it felt like the rest of the world could burn as long as we were standing in the ashes together. And he didn't even try to play it cool anymore, not when I was around, always finding reasons to touch me, to say baby in that low voice that made my knees go weak, and yeah, I teased him for it, called him clingy and dramatic, but honestly, I loved it. Loved the way his jealousy flared up when I got a text from any guy that wasn't a relative. Loved the way he hovered near me like a protective storm cloud every time we went out. And speaking of going out, the company gala was coming up, one of those fancy Carter Foundation events where the family put on their best masks and smiled for press and donors, and I hadn't planned on going, but Liam insisted, said he wanted me there, wanted the world to know. And I tried to remind him that technically, we still had to tread carefully, but he just shrugged and said, "Let them talk," and it was that simple for him, and honestly, I admired that about him, how unapologetic he was about loving me, about being mine. And that night as we got ready, I watched him tie his black tie in the mirror, sleek suit fitting his body like it was tailored by angels, and when I stepped out in the backless satin dress I'd impulsively splurged on, his eyes darkened like he was about to cancel the whole event and drag me back to bed. "You're not wearing that," he said, voice low, and I smirked. "You told me to look like someone they'd remember," and his jaw clenched. "Yeah, well, now I'm going to have to punch every guy who looks at you." And I just laughed and slid my arm into his. "That sounds like a you problem." And the event itself was a blur: champagne, fake smiles, more barrage comments than I could keep up with, most of them unhinged as usual. The dress. The hair. Liam's smirk. I'm dead. And someone sedate that man. He's one more compliment away from staking his claim right here on the ballroom floor, and I don't know who she is, but I want to be her, which made me want to simultaneously die of embarrassment and scream from the rooftops. Because yes, this was my life now, and it was a lot, but it was also mine, and Liam's hand never left me once that night, not even when reporters started whispering, not even when his aunts gave me that polite venomous look, not even when Jason Miller, my old classmate, who I hadn't seen since that awkward high school reunion, showed up with his new fiancée and had the audacity to do a double take when he saw me on Liam's arm. "Natalie? Wow, you look amazing," he said, and Liam's grip on my waist tightened by exactly 30%. "Thanks," I said, keeping it cool. "This is my boyfriend, Liam Carter." And I swear the room stopped breathing for half a second, and Jason nodded slowly. "Right, of course," and as soon as he walked away, Liam leaned in and whispered, "I don't like him," and I whispered back, "That's fine, I don't like him either," and that was that until the very end of the night when Liam dragged me into a quiet hallway, pushed me gently against the wall, and kissed me like we had all the time in the world. "You're mine," he murmured, lips against my neck. "I don't care what anyone else thinks, I'm never letting go, and I tilted my head back and whispered, good. Because I'm not letting go either, and maybe that was the real moment everything shifted for good, because after that night, things felt different, like a page had turned, like we'd finally stepped into the life we kept flirting with from opposite sides of a glass wall. And then came the morning I walked downstairs and found him sitting at the kitchen island with a suspiciously nervous expression and a velvet box in his hand, and my heart just stopped. Liam, I said slowly, what is that? And he looked up, all serious and soft at the same time. You know how I said I didn't want to be your brother? I nodded, yeah, and he opened the box a ring, oh my god, and said, then let's make it official, and I blinked so fast I thought I was hallucinating. Are you serious right now? And he nodded, dead serious. You don't have to say yes today or even next week, but I wanted you to know I am in this for real, forever, and tears stung my eyes before I could stop them, and I leaned over and kissed him, hard, whispering, you idiot, I've always known, and he smiled. Then don't leave me hanging too long, and the barrage exploded like a fireworks show in my mind. He did it. He proposed. I can't breathe. The brother-to-boyfriend-to-husband pipeline is real. Someone write this down. This is history. And I laughed through the tears and held his hand and realized that for all the mess, all the pain, all the awkward family dinners and late-night kiss marks I had to cover with scarves, this was worth it. All of it. Because Liam wasn't just the guy I loved, was my person, my chaos, my calm, my home, and I didn't care what title the world gave us anymore. I only cared that he was mine, and I was his, and that somehow, against all odds, our story had stopped being a secret and started becoming the only truth that mattered.